Hello and most welcome to 1265 and speak about divergence, beauty, abundance of change and difference here in this beautiful haven. You will find all of it. Although at the present moment there are very few flowers. The ones that are shining all the more. I've been proposing many times that universities and high schooling education levels should have more flowers and greenery and nicer environment. Well, it might be even more important, I would say much more important, that the inner environment is full of flowers and differences and change, and not the structural Newtonian dogmatic unknowledgeable time. Because this is how your inner should look also. So we should have flowers outside, but also flowers inside. To let everything flower, shine, and be bright. And to truly embrace life and yourself and the outside. I remember I was told that you, Everett's personal life was rancid, dry, crusted, non-enjoyable, non-happy. Just the idea to produce, effect, and cause. And how nice is discovery? I thought these things were I did actually in my mind think these were cartons, boxes, wood, paper boxes to inhabit, that has been thrown away here by somebody who took some chips from McDonald's, but it actually says anti-Cemex. I don't think there is anything nice inside of that box. And the realization that it is not McDonald's came firstly when I saw that there is one of these paper boxes in each corner. And I think that is a change, that is a discovery, and that is also completely unexpected. Who would have thought? So I will continue with this 1265 with my reading. I do apologize if my voice at times becomes monotonous. This is me trying to understand. But I also noticed the monotonous periods of my speech are becoming less and less. This is a development. caused by the contents of the text itself, because I feel energized by Roberto Unger. It touched me in a way that no other text ever touched me. This is coming from my heart. And of course, as always, it is very helpful when I understand that the reviews fail to capture what I felt. It seems that the reviewers are still stuck in the dogmatic world, which I think is rather obvious. I was stuck there for ages myself. It's very hard to avoid. It's part and parcel of being a human being almost. I bet you there are people here who do not take enjoyment of the beautiful garden and instead only take notes of the small signs that accompany the flowers. You could take signs, notes of the signs, and enjoy. There is no contradiction there. These special and general considerations justify overturning all supposed barriers to the full reception of the most important cosmological discovery, the discovery that the universe has a history. Everything in the universe was once different than it is now. Everything in the universe will change sooner or later. There's no good reason to suppose that anything is outside of time, which means that anything is not susceptible to change. To this principle, however, the predominant cosmological and physical ideas make two closely related exceptions. They make a first exception in favor of an immutable framework of laws, symmetries, and constants. The values of certain fundamental relations or ratios in the workings of nature. They make a second exception in favor of a picture of the most elementary particles and fields of which nature is constituted. The two exceptions are connected. The laws, symmetries, and constants have as their subject matter the interactions among a particular stock of constituents of nature, and would have no significance apart from them. The stock is an arbitrary bric-a-brac until considered in relation to the laws, symmetries, and constants, calling them to order. These two exceptions are not warranted by our cosmological discoveries or required for the practice of science. Under our present understanding of the history of the universe, however, neither the regularities nor the stock could have been the same at the beginning of the universe as they subsequently became in the cooled down universe with its discriminate structure. If they were different then, they may become different again. Here are 4 reasons, all of them mistaken, why we might insist on this twofold exception to the reach of time. Although the list is not exhaustive, it includes all the most influential classes of argument for exempting the ultimate structure and regularities of the universe from its history. The first reason is the view that there is no time, or that there is time only in some greatly restricted and qualified sense. Then we cannot accommodate the discovery that the universe has a history and all the observations and experiments with which this history is associated, except by radically reinterpreting their significance. I later address 2 classes of philosophical objections to the reality of time, whether inclusive or not. The second reason is that science cannot continue to do its explanatory work without presupposing such an immutable framework and stock. The second reason is sheer metaphysical prejudice. it is contradicted by the existence of many versions of scientific inquiry, particularly in the life and earth sciences and natural history, relying on no such presuppositions. It is true that we do not know how to do physics without invoking permanent laws and constituents. We need to learn how. The history of modern science offers many sources of guidance. Cosmology and physics, without unchanging laws and natural kinds, present the genuine enigma that we call the conundrum of the meta-laws. The third reason is that the earliest events in history of the universe would be, by virtue of their inclusion or proximity to an infinite initial singularity, beyond the reach of scientific inquiry. However, this reasoning mistakes a mathematical inference from the field equations of general relativity for an image of the workings of nature. Moreover, it draws a picture that must be unsatisfactory to the scientist. A structure that is immutable until, at some uncertain point, it falls off into the abyss of the infinite. It would better accord with both the discovery that the universe has a history and the practice of specialized and localized branches of physics. To suppose that there is over time some set of discontinuous transformations, including transformations of both the regularities and the stock, and that we can come progressively to investigate and to understand. The fourth reason is that in the cool-down universe we observe both the regularities and the stock are in fact very stable. It is tempting to infer their eternity and their necessity from their stability. However, a comprehensive cosmological view, one accommodating the historical character of the universe, must be able to reconcile stability at some times with transformation at others. That such a reconciliation can form part of a successful research program in science, we know for a fact, because it is one of the main tenets of the now dominant neo-Darwinian synthesis in evolutionary theory, as amplified by the conception of punctuated equilibrium. It also has counterparts in the investigation of lifeless nature in geology, as well as in the study of human history and society. A lesson of these analogous research agendas is that the understanding of stable laws and types may be decisively reshaped by insight into their transformability, even if they are in fact stable over extended periods and in particular domains. At its heart, scientific insight is always insight into transformation. A structural understanding is never deeper than its grasp of the conditions under which the phenomena that it addresses change into something else and have changed to become what they are. These arguments, developing the cosmological program of a comprehensive temporal naturalism, both invoke and justify an idea of time. They are arguments about change. However, in being arguments about change, they are also arguments about time. For time and change are eternally related concepts. Both are in turn internally related to causation. Time is the fundamental aspect of reality, of all nature, by virtue of which everything changes. Because everything is connected, directly or indirectly. With everything else. And what is the sum of such relations? To say that everything changes is to say that it changes with regard to these other things. Such an understanding of reality conforms to three minimalist postulates. The first is the postulate of reality. There is something rather than nothing. The second is the postulate of plurality. There is more than one phenomenon or being. The third is the postulate of connection. The plural things that exist are connected. These three postulates might be described as forming a proto-ontology. Were this label not likely to arouse a misunderstanding? This proto-ontology can inform a view, like the temporal naturalism developed in this book, that rejects the idea of a permanent repertory of natural kinds and of law-like regularities governing their interactions. To define such a system of beings and laws or principles was the aim of classical ontology. Thus, the system jointly formed by the postulates of reality, plurality, and connection might be better described as an anti-ontology, or as the beginning of one. Time understood in this way is also susceptible to differential changes, because things change differently or unevenly. The change of some can be used to measure or clock the change of others. To say that time is inclusively real is to hold that nothing in nature is exempt from the susceptibility to change, including change itself. Susceptibility to change reaches all laws, symmetries, and supposed constants, as well the kinds of things, the natural kinds that there are, including the most elementary constituents of nature. We develop this concept of time into a particular conception, fully to elucidate the significance of the discovery that the universe has a history. Such a conception must treat time as non-emergent, global, or cosmic, irreversible and continuous. Much of the rest of this chapter is devoted to developing this conception of time and to discussing its cosmological and historical basis, uses, and implications. Of these four attributes of time, the first, non-emergence, is the most fundamental. The second, that it exists in the form of preferred global time, as well as in the form of local time, is the most controversial, given the most influential interpretations of general relativity. The third, that time is irreversible, is the proximate premise of universal history. It must be affirmed cosmological as a view of the universe and its history, or not at all. We cannot derive it securely from any theory of local phenomena, such as statistical mechanics. The thought that time is continuous is the most mysterious in the light of anti-temporal bias of the mathematical imagination. Such a conception of time may at first appear to contradict the assumptions of a relational approach. We may be tempted to interpret it as the description of the attributes of a thing or substance in the manner of a metaphysical system like Aristotle's or Spinoza's. The outcome of such an interpretation would amount to return to an absolute idea of time, like Newton's. We may be seduced into taking this turn by the spatial quality of our intuitions. So we may think of time as a medium in which all phenomena move, like the ether of late 19th century physics. Or like an empty moving film on slices of which physical events set their mark. Time, however, is not such thing. It is an integral part of the way in which everything is what it is. Everything is what it is only because it can become something else. Only because it can become something else can we hope to understand what it now is or was. Like causality, from which it is inseparable, temporality is a primitive feature of nature and of how it works. Contrary to Hume and to Kant and to the traditions that they inaugurated, causation is only secondarily a requirement of the understanding. It is about the world before it is about us. These ideas suggest a cosmological view in which the laws of nature, as well as the symmetries, the supposed constants, may change. Nevertheless, the mutability that, in principle, they enjoy must be reconciled with the stability in the cool-down universe. The need to reconcile their mutability with their stability is forced on us by the facts of the history of the universe as they begin to emerge from the findings of large-scale astronomy, as well as from the ideas of theoretical cosmology. At different moments in the history of the universe, nature presents itself in radically different forms. only the development of cosmology as a historical science and the formulation of a cosmological equivalent to the physics of phase transitions can provide the theoretical basis for such a reconciliation between the stability and the mutability of the laws of nature. It is a development that must be undertaken with full acknowledgements of the limits of the analogy to the physics of phase transitions. A first such difference is that this physics deals with local realities and can thus legitimately deploy the Newtonian paradigm. A second such difference is that the phases addressed by the physics of phase transitions are enduring states of nature in accordance with stable regularities. From the outset, such a project faces the dilemma that we call the conundrum of the meta-laws. If change of the laws is law-governed, we have solved the problem only by reinstating in favor of such higher order laws an exemption from the reach of time, that is to say, from susceptibility to change. If change of the laws is not law-governed, it may seem too arbitrary or unexplained, without benefit of any theory accounting for the nature and limits of such uncertainty. Progress in the solution to this conundrum is crucial to the future of cosmology. Later in this book, each of us explores responses to this conundrum. A beginning lies in treating causality as more fundamental than the laws of nature, rather than in treating laws as the indispensable warrants to causal judgments. As we generally suppose. It lies as well in recognizing causal connection as a primitive feature of nature, rather than simply as a presupposition of our apprehension and understanding of nature. according to Kant's influential approach, not just what causes what in time, but how it causes what it causes, as well, therefore, as the character of causal connections cannot be mere matters of theoretical prejudice. They are proper subjects for empirical inquiry. In cosmology, they take on the widest and most important form. If, however, no progress were yet possible in the solution to these problems, our failure to solve them would give us no excuse to resist acknowledging the mutability of the laws of nature is both implied by the idea of inclusive reality of time and suggested by what we already know about the history of the universe. Before I address philosophical objections to the reality of time, I pause to look back on the preceding arguments in this section and to summarize the main reasons to pursue the cosmological agenda that they suggest and support. If we set aside all technical refinement and complication, the better to grasp the essential content of these ideas, we can see that they provide three main reasons to complete the transformation of cosmology into a historical science founded on recognition of the inclusive reality of time. The first basic reason to pursue this agenda is to widen the intellectual space in which we seek answers to the question, where do the laws and symmetries, as well as the initial conditions of the universe, come from? History does not succeed to rationalist metaphysics. It does not pretend to tell us why the laws and symmetries must be what they are. It fails to dispel at the wave of a metaphysical wand what, together with its temporality, is the most important feature of the universe: its factitiousness, factitiousness, that it is rather something than something else. However, a historical approach to the universe, like the view for which we argue in this book, rodents the room in which the central practice of science, causal inquiry, can work. In so doing, such an approach also attenuates the contrast between the unwarranted appearance of the necessity of the laws and the seeming strangeness, unlikelihood, and arbitrariness of the initial conditions. Both the initial conditions and the laws emerge and evolve under this view in the course of universal history, to the history of the kinds of things that there are, including the kinds that there were in the early universe. There corresponds a history of the laws, symmetries, and supposed constants of nature, its regularities. To act on this first reason requires that we lift the bar on the extension of causal inquiry imposed by the inference of an infinite initial singularity from the field equations of general relativity. The justification for lifting that bar is, as I previously argued, both particular and general. The particular ground is that the inference of an infinite initial singularity is best interpreted as a sign of the breakdown of the theory, when carried beyond its proper domain of application, rather than as the description of a physical state of affairs. The force of this argument rests, however, in large part on a more general ground. The absence of the infinite from nature. Behind the concept of a cosmological singularity stands the mathematical idea of the infinite, benefiting from the dangerous seductions as well as from the matchless power of mathematics. The second major reason to follow this agenda is that it allows us to avoid the unsatisfactory position to which cosmology has been driven in the absence of such an agenda. Our successive discoveries concerning the evolution of the universe led us increasingly to conclude that everything in the arrangements of nature, its elementary constituents, and its organization was once different from what it now is, and will be different again at another place and another time in the universe. How can we make sense of the coexistence of unchanging laws, symmetries, and apparent constants of nature with change in the elementary composition and organization of nature? We might make an analogy to the local physics of phase transitions and say that the laws explain the change in the constitution of nature just as they govern phase transitions. Moreover, we might seek support for this claim in the undisputed success of simulations of the evolution of the universe back to relatively early moments in its history on the basis of the established laws. The trouble is that the laws and other regularities of nature fail to explain change beyond or before nucleosynthesis. Beyond or before that time, the composition and organization of nature, and even the extent to which causal connections display law-like regularities, may have been radically different from what they subsequently became in the cooled-down universe. What we call the initial conditions of the universe is a name for part of this early constitution. It is the part defined by the combination of two criteria: that we can distinguish it from the regularities of nature, and that the regularities fail to explain it. Failure to explain the initial conditions of the universe is just another name for the failure of the structural laws established by contemporary physics and cosmology completely to explain the evolution of the universe. Two very different responses to this predicament are then possible. One response is to suppose in the spirit of the no dominant ideas and practices in cosmology, that as science advances, we shall be able to reproduce on a cosmological and universal historical scale the success of the physics of phase transitions. This physics explains in law-like fashion changes in the local constitution of nature. For the cosmological analogy to the physics of phase transitions to be successful, we would have to explain this evolution on the basis of an adjustment to the established catalogue of the laws. Given the radical changes that appear to have taken place in the course of the history of the universe, we would, at a minimum, have to enlarge our view of the regularities of nature. To do so, we will need to appeal not just to more or adjusted laws and symmetries, but to a different kind of law-like explanation. If nature, in those formative moments of the universe, consisted in singular events and failed to display law-like regularities, we could not hope to solve the problem by simply extending or adjusting the present stock of our explanatory ideas. It would be necessary to change the way in which we explain as well as the content of our explanation. The way to explain and the content both need to change. It's not enough, as Kant and Hume did, to change the content. They were limited from the very outset. And it absolutely shocks me to understand that. It is just beyond belief. They were already, when they sat down by their desks and started to write their philosophies, incredibly limited in the way how they could explain things. And their way of explaining things were incredibly limiting. It is not unfathomable to realize that all in the life of Kant was excluded for him. Everything of beauty, difference, I would call it fractality, finesse, sharpness. Actually looks like a rhubarb. Acuity, lucidness, because being inside the premises of how you can explain and the way of explaining already from the very outset, or a priori as Kant would call it himself, being so utterly limited, making all that Kant wrote being a copy of the understanding, not the content being different, every word being different possibly, but the mode of understanding already decided. And here, my friends, I think we have the shortest, clearest, and best explanation of the closing of the Western mind. How it's been closed has never before been explained. They all have different views. Spengler, modernity itself, whatever that means. Ian McGilchrist, the takeover of the left, repetitious, non-intellectual brain sphere of the left. Wittgenstein said it was a mistake in language without further making clear what that mistake could be. Carnap, blame lack of logic. Jordan Peterson, Steven Pinker wrote that we need to get back to making our own bed. I don't think it's unimportant, but it's much more to it. If the way Jordan Peterson and Steven Pinker are writing their books, are formulating in their minds their speeches, if that is already decided before, what could the scope be? How much of originality and newness could they bring to the fore? I would say immensely little, if anything. This must be some type of rhododendron. That is almost growing in water. I would say there could be no freedom within that extreme limitation. And for every time you reformulate yourself in the manner already decided beforehand, you will go down more and more. This is why everyone is losing their posture, and as they study, analyze, think, they become more and more tense, giving up their bodies. And possibly it could be that it doesn't matter what they do, because this limitation is so cutting off. Making space in thinking, I would say, is what Unger is doing, and that is pretty amazing. It is like a spa with all the wonders of nature and some deserted island in the Pacifics that carry all joys and all food, all put in one. And making all those things, if you still want them, even more accessible and wondrous. It is like a fruit that never ends, and it doesn't give you bad teeth or make you fat. It just invigorates you for every bite. Yeah, this is how I would say the writing of Roberto Unger is. Of course, it took some time to get used to. He's not after the content. And because he's not after the content, he's not making an argument or criticizing in the normal way. If he would have done that, he would be like Kant and Hume inside a little box of how to explain things, because it's the how that is important. And for those who have studied Heidegger, the how question is the unanswered question of the West. We went directly to the what, bit like Monopoly, not passing through start. Have a very nice afternoon, and bye-bye for now.